Broadcasting live from Business Radio X studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for Learning Insights, featuring learning professionals improving performance to drive business results.
Welcome to another exciting and informative edition of Learning Insights, brought to you by our good friends at Training Pro. Stone Payton Lee Cantor here with you. Lee, this is going to be a fantastic segment. Please join me in welcoming back to the Business Radio X microphone with Baker Construction Enterprises, Mr. Paul Smith. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thank you very much.
Before we dive into some of your day-to-day work, can you just give us a quick primer background on Baker Construction Enterprises? And this is a pretty big outfit with a large footprint in the industry, right?
Yeah, it's actually, and most people would be more familiar with the name Baker Concrete Construction, which is Baker Construction Enterprises, like an umbrella that has various other entities underneath it. The largest entity is Baker Concrete Construction, and it's the nation's largest concrete construction company, doing things like stadiums and high rises and skyscrapers and large, massive facilities like that. Like if you've ever been to Mile High Stadium in Denver, that was us, and things like
wow.
that. So, the work that I'm doing that they brought me in for was, to take advantage of, the structure on the job training, which is, my bread and butter. But to try to mobilize that into boosting training for their skilled trade areas. And in fact, right now I'm up to my eyeballs and rolling out a training program to better train their new foremen. The individuals that initially crossed the line from being, I was on the crew last week and this week I'm in charge of the crew. What do I do now that my world has changed? Traditionally, a lot of construction companies do very little to proactively train those individuals, even though I think those individuals are some of the most important people in any construction project, because not only are they responsible for making sure the crew is getting the work done, which is the real reason a construction company exists, is that work the crew is doing, but they also have accountability to the company, where they have direct first line impact on the costs of the job, the quality of the job, the interaction with the customers, which, can determine repeat business. All of those things, that foreman on the job site has direct impact in all that stuff. And so it's really a shame that we just leave them out there to, fend for themselves. So Baker doesn't want to keep doing that. They want to prepare those guys.
Now, historically, it's, as you said, this has been kind of an on-the-job training situation over the years, right? I would imagine that in no matter in one market, they're doing it a certain way. And then if a different crew in a different place in the country or world, they might be doing it the same activity a totally different way. Yeah. Well,
and as with anything, there's logically, a standard sequence of things that you do. There's only so many ways to do certain aspects, but you can have your own variation. And the type of work you're doing, whether you're doing decks or the flooring, the or you're doing columns or vertical concrete pouring things, it's different types of forms, it's different types of safety measures, it's different aspects you have to be careful of. And Baker has their main locations are all over the place. Denver and Houston and DC and Fort Lauderdale and all around. And each of those markets, to your point, each of them, we're doing slightly different kinds of work. One might be focusing more on high-rise work, whereas another one is focusing more on large-scale, spread-out complexes. And and that does require that there is some variation of how those individuals are trained.
So now, what was the biggest challenge for you? Did you, how well schooled were you in all of this before you started there?
Well, since I'm a construction expert, I'm no, I say that jokingly because prior to being at Baker, I was at another company called the Waldinger Corporation, which is more regional based in the Midwest. It's a mechanical subcontractor doing sheet metal and HVAC stuff, things like that, electrical and piping, those kind of things, but for large scale buildings, not residential, but commercial and governmental kind of things. But I was only with them for little over 4 years. And prior to that, my only construction experience was helping my dad do his handyman work. So, it was a kind of a sharp learning curve. But what I find is interesting is in my role, I don't necessarily have to know how to do everything that a member of the crew does. But what I do need is the ability to be able to find out from them what someone else who's going to do their job needs to know. And that's where my background in journalism really pays off, because I'm good at going out and talking with as many individuals as possible, interviewing them and asking them those basic questions. Okay, we're developing training for new foremen. So I go out and I talk to new foremen. I talk to veteran foremen. I talk to individuals, superintendents who have supported foremen, who have seen them succeed, who've seen them fail, have supported them along the way, and different individuals from different angles. And I've said, what does someone in this role really need to know? What are the things that seem to be constant struggles, constant problems? Where do we lose money because this person doesn't know what they're doing? And those kind of questions. And they give me all that information, and then I put that together. And it's not me. It's not my knowledge. My ability is getting information out of other people and putting it together. Those people are the smart ones, and they bring the real meat and potatoes to the table.
So when you have all this information, how does it get disseminated back to the learner? I would imagine that in today's environment, it's hard to find talented people to do the work that you need done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And the job market is so incredibly tight that it is really difficult for skill-based professions like construction to be able to sometimes just find enough workers, period. That when everyone brags about the low unemployment rate, and that is a good thing in many respects, but it's not a good thing for industries like construction, because when unemployment rates are higher, then there's a lot of people that are willing to do that kind of work too. But because of that, you want to make sure that the individuals that you do hire, that you train them as quickly as possible to be as good as possible at their jobs, and that you then treat them in such a way that you retain them as well, because now that you've got a good quality person, you don't want to lose them either. And so having a good, solid development training program is a way to do both of those things. And that, nice segue for us to touch on structure on the job training, because for the type of work that this industry is, that's the most effective way to do the training. I take all that information from all those resources, and then that begins to form the picture of what does someone in this specific role need to be able to know, need to be able to do to be competent in the opinion of our organization. And then from that list, you make a companion list of, okay, so for each of those things you've listed, what is the measurable thing? What is the observable thing that they can do so that somebody else, some supervisor is able to observe and say, yes, you did that. You were competent at that. And I'm going to sign off on that one thing. And the example I use to illustrate is if somebody said, well, in this job, you need to be able to use Excel. Okay, great. What does that mean? There's a whole lot to Excel. What do we really expect of this person? And generally, when we say someone needs to be able to use Excel in any given role, there are specific things we expect them to be able to do in Excel, specific templates that they need to use, or spreadsheets we want them to develop, or charts, or pivot tables even, or something. But usually there's very specific things we want that person to be able to do. And so that being the case, that's the measurable item. It's okay to say they need to know how to use Excel, but what we're really going to say is, one of the things we need to be able to do in Excel is complete the such and such template. Okay. That becomes the measurable output that someone can observe. And so once you've got that list of all these measurable output items, however long or short that list may be by the position, then you look at that list and you say, okay, out of all this stuff, what parts of this make sense to teach in a classroom setting versus what of this does it really make the most sense to be taught in a guided on-the-job situation? And so the things that can be taught, or maybe in some cases just introduced in a classroom, because honestly, I'm a big fan of classroom training. I started as a classroom teacher, high school teacher way back years ago. but now, I recognize that classroom training is great for dispensing information, but that's really all it's good for. If you want someone to be able to do something, they're not going to walk out of listening to a teacher talk about it and know what they're doing. They have to get some hands-on experience. And so that's where the structure on the job training, then you say, here's the stuff we can teach in the classroom, but then the rest of that, okay, now we've got a guided checklist basically that they're able to take with them to a job site, and somebody else can walk through it and say, okay, you haven't shown you can do this yet. Let me show you how you do this. And then I'm going to give you opportunities to do it. I'm going to observe you. And when I'm confident that you're able to do it consistently and competently, then I'll sign off on that line item. And boom, you have structure on the job training.
Now, in your situation, is the foreman the person that's in charge of the training, or is someone training the foreman and the people below the foreman?
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on who the trainee is. If the foreman themselves is the trainee, as is the case with the program I'm building right now, then obviously it needs to be a person above them, which would be either a general foreman, if it's a large job that has, someone in that capacity, most likely a superintendent who is overseeing a job and there are multiple crews that have foremen. But in other situations, it might be a project manager, or it might be a department manager, or, however an organization is set up. But if we were talking about training in craft people on their crew, then that would be a foreman who would have direct responsibility for making sure their crew is trained and prepared. So it just depends on the role that you're teaching.
So now you, as head trainer, are you getting buy-in from them that this kind of bite-sized learning at the pace of the learner is going the way that everybody is, complying and doing the work the way you want them to?
Mm-hmm. Oh, actually, it doesn't take a lot to get the buy-in, because when you're talking, again, about very heavy skill-based roles, you find that those individuals will tolerate going to a formal classroom environment, but they're not fans of it because number one, they see it as taking them away from their job. They see it as slowing down production because they're not doing the work. It's not just however long the class is, it's the travel time, it's, the inconvenience, et cetera, et cetera. So they already start in the hole, in their opinion, of the classroom training. And then, like it or not, a lot of the classroom training that we subject people to, as I said, is just passing on information, and there's really no direct application when they're leaving the room. It's not like, okay, you've sat through an hour or a day or whatever, and here are the things that you now are going to do back on your job. That would be different. At least they could see the application of that. But more often than not, they go, they sit through whatever it is. They get a certificate that they stayed awake during the session. They signed their name on a form so the company can say, yep, we ran everyone through it. And then that's it. That's what training looks like for those individuals. And so that being the case, they don't put a lot of stock in what happens in a classroom environment. But when you tell them that you are working on doing some training, that they'll actually be able to do the bulk of the training on the job site in the real world context of what it is that they need to be doing, that makes total sense. When you think about when we were in high school, or maybe even younger, at one time or another, everybody raised their hand and said, why do we need to know this? And the teacher would say, because it'll be on the test. And, in school, that was okay. That was a good enough answer. As adults, we still want to raise our hand and say, why do I need to know this? But because it'll be on the test is not a sufficient answer. I need to know as an adult, how does this apply to me? How is this relevant to my day-to-day work? And if the instructor cannot answer that question almost right away before we even get into the training, before the content even starts, then you'll have trouble retaining the attention of that adult learner the entire time. So then when you put the learning in the context of the job site, then you answer that why question right off the bat. There's no question of why do I need to learn this? Well, the why is obvious, because you're standing here doing it. And so there's very little resistance to that. The problem isn't that people resist that approach. The problem is that it's a lot of work to create the kind of program to actually do a structured on-the-job training.
So when you landed at Baker, I'm sure you didn't come in guns a-blazing. Did you find yourself, did you find yourself sort of tilling the soil a little bit and pre-selling some of this this thinking pattern, or is that part of the reason that you came in the first place? What was that like, coming into a new environment and getting something like this off the ground?
Well, I mean, I can't speak specifically for what they were all talking about. But, what I know that from my vantage point, they I mean, not bragging, but I mean, they came after me. They recruited me because they apparently felt that these things that we're talking about were things that they had already decided this would be good for us. This would work for us, and really wanted to implement those kind of things. So it hasn't really been a tough sell or even a neat. Baker, like a lot of other companies, has had an up and down history of how they've done training. At one point in time, they had a whole Baker University, kind of concept going on. And then, again, like a lot of companies, when the economy tanked, 15 years ago or so, 10 years ago, whatever it was, that caused that Baker University to have challenges as well. And it got reduced and pulled back. And since then, each of the what they call burgs, but the markets, the regional offices have all sort of just been doing training on their own, and taking care of their own people, which is good. I mean, you're still making sure people get training, but you then lose that sense of identity of the company. You lose that sense of consistency, and most importantly, the company itself is not able to ensure that there is a level of quality, a standard that everyone is attaining to, and so. Those are things that the company wants to do. And, when you present it that way, that you're not looking to eliminate successes that local offices have had, you're wanting to build on those things and bring it all together under one grouping and make sure that everyone benefits from being able to grow. Yeah. I've yet to get resistance from anyone. A lot of offers to help and let me know whatever you need. And that, Baker is very supportive of training itself. They just needed to get their program kickstarted again and get it underway.
Well, I think that's fantastic. And I suspect you're being a little bit modest with regard to your ability to introduce new ideas and affect change in a large, complex system, but I appreciate this. But this whole idea, this whole idea to me is very reminiscent of a model that has worked to great effect in a lot of organizations or in a lot of situations. It's reminiscent of the apprenticeship kind of model. It just seems to have more structure, more rigor. Yeah. Can you speak to that as sort of a different spin on the apprenticeship model, right? Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because when I present about the structure on the job training concept, like at conferences, things like that, there will always be individuals who say, "Now, this sounds like an apprenticeship. How is this different from an apprenticeship?" And my response is, it's not radically different. It's actually very similar to an apprenticeship model, where the biggest distinction, and I'm being very very elementary level with this. But the biggest distinction that you notice right away is that an apprenticeship is really time driven, whereas a structured job training program is content driven. And by that, I mean an apprenticeship program is designed not just to teach content, but to instill a sense of mastery, a sense of skilled craftsmen, if you will. And so, there are multiple levels to an apprenticeship program, and let's say the level 1 is 5 years, level 2 is 5 years, level 3 is 5 years. And in level 1, here's a list of content you're going to learn. Well, if you're a go-getter and you learn that content in the first, year and a half, you're still at level 1 for 5 years. You're not advancing. And again, the reason for that being the idea that, now you'll spend the rest of that time honing those skills so that you're now a master craftsman at those things before we move you to the next level. So, it makes total sense. But increasingly, we now see younger generation employees that are not satisfied with that kind of model. They feel very constrained. They actually get frustrated. They'll even leave an organization if they don't feel like
they are advancing at the rate they believe they should be able to be advancing at. And so you may have someone who's a real they're a go-getter. You want to keep them, and then they just up and quit because they don't feel like they're getting anywhere. And the organization says, well, but you're in the apprenticeship program. It's 5 years, but well, see, the structure on the job training program uses that same concept of, like I said before, you map out, here's all the measurable competencies of someone in a role. However, there's no time constraint. So again, you got the go-getter. They might burn through stuff on that list really quickly and just round through. Eventually, they're going to plateau. They're going to hit some stuff that, okay, hold it, stop. This may take a little longer for me to digest. I'm going to need to dig into this a little more, and they may hover on those concepts for a little bit longer than the other stuff. And then they'll get that under their belt, and then they'll move on back down through the list. But the rate at which they progress is driven by the ability of the learner to move through the content rather than pre-described by measurements of time. And so that's the biggest fundamental difference between those programs. But now, you mentioned apprenticeships, now there's another concept, because from the federal government level, we're seeing this big push for apprenticeship programs. And Department of Labor is putting all kinds of money into grants, and states are putting money into grants, and there's all this going on because there's this increasing recognition that the best way to train our workforce to address the skills gap, and that's a whole nother topic. We have all of these unemployed people who want to make decent money, and so we get the push for the $15 minimum wage, all that kind of stuff. But they want to make decent money, and we have all these jobs that pay decent money and have good benefits. The problem is the people who are unemployed don't have the training and skills to fill the jobs that need filled. And so there's this skill gap. Well, the best way to address that skill gap is through, a structured on-the-job training approach, or an apprenticeship program, as someone default to. And now, though, because of that structured time frame, that then creates consternation. That creates issue for some. They want to move it faster than that. And so we now see the introduction of a term called informal apprenticeships. And it's actually a concept that has already been very popular in other countries. In fact, if you do a Google search for informal apprenticeships, the initial results you'll see are all from like Africa and Asia and Zimbabwe and Ghana and all those kind of places where they have robust programs underway using informal apprenticeship programs. And what an informal apprenticeship program is, an apprenticeship program without the time constraints. Well, how do you create that? Well, use structure on the job training, build your framework, and ta-da, you can launch an informal apprenticeship program.
Now, Paul, let's talk a little bit about you. At some point in your career, you decided to write a book, the Learning While Working book. Can you talk about that from a career standpoint for the other people in the industry, and if they want to advance their career? How important was that book, and to come up with this kind of a unique take on this kind of work, and for you to create the book and then roll out the book? How has that been for your career, and would you recommend other people in the industry taking that same tact?
Well, I mean, to answer the back part of that, how much impact it's had on my career. Well, I'm pretty sure it had something to do with why I'm at Baker now. And so, I suppose it's had an impact on my career in that sense. It wasn't the only thing, but it was one of the things that the recruiters were aware of, and kind of led them in that direction. But my route to actually doing the book was substantially different than what I think most people's experience is, because a lot of people set out to write a book, that they have a concept that they want to write a book about, or they're a consultant or a speaker, and they've been traveling around talking about something. They're like, you know what? I think I'll put this into a book, and then I could sell copies of it. I could make some extra money selling the book, doing that way. But my approach to this was, I'm very active in the Association for Talent Development, ATD, and went to one of their conferences. Actually, the first one that I went to after I'd started working at the previous company, the Waldinger Corporation, and my boss there also went, and it was his very first time going to one. And after that conference, we were debriefing, and he said, it was a good conference, a lot of stuff, but there really wasn't a whole lot that addressed skill-based industries like construction. And I thought, you're right. Previous to that, I'd always worked in, insurance companies or the financial sector institutions, because there's a lot of those in Des Moines, Iowa. And for that crowd, there's a lot of stuff at the ATD conference, but there wasn't a lot for skill-based stuff. And so the following year, I submitted a session RFP, and they picked it up. And I submitted a session to talk about structured on-the-job training, which I didn't invent, but I was, I was creating the programs, and we were launching them very successfully at Waldinger. And so that's what I proposed to talk about. And ATD picked it up, put it in a prime slot, recorded it, and I was just blown away that I got that kind of reception first time out of the chute to be a speaker. But as it turned out, in further conversation with ATD, this was the topic: structure on the job training and the corollary of the informal apprenticeship. That this was stuff that was rapidly building on the horizon, that ATD recognized they didn't have anything in print about. They didn't have any books, anything recent. In fact, you got to Amazon. Well, if you go to Amazon, you'll find my book. But other than that, the other books on the topic are like 10, 15 years old. There hadn't been anything even recently done on it. And so they were like, we'd like to have something in print about this. And did a couple of magazine articles, did a couple of blog things for them, but what they really wanted was the book. And so, we went back and forth a bit. I put some stuff together. They told me, no, that's not what we want. And we did the dance a bit. Took me almost a year before we got to the point where they said, okay, good. Now we feel like this is good. Do you feel it's good? And I'm thinking, yeah, now it feels good to me too. Yeah. And we're on the same page. And then they sent a contract. And at that point, they gave me 4 months to write it.
Oh, ouch. All right. Before we wrap, Paul, let's be practical here. It's not all rainbows and unicorns. You guys, I would think, particularly in your industry, let me know if this assumption is accurate. You're dealing with maybe a variety of levels of education. You've got different cultures.
Absolutely.
You may have people who are language barriers. Speak to that a little bit and how you and your team are trying to work through that.
No, that's a very poignant observation, because the foreman population that I'm targeting right now, we estimate that at between 700 and 800 people, and of those individuals, a good 80%, if not more, are Hispanic, and of those individuals, a significant percentage English is barely a second language, if a second language at all. And many of them have what would be at best, the equivalent of an elementary level education in the U.S. And that's not to say that they're not smart. They're very intelligent. Their formal schooling was limited. And so all of those factors mean you got the culture, you got the language, you got the educational level. All of those are factors that mean, you can't just, again, it's further reasons why you can't sit them in a classroom and just talk to them. Because that is a guaranteed way to fail in communicating that information. It further reinforces why the best way to train individuals with those kind of dynamics is in a way where they can tangibly, with their hands, tactically, be doing the stuff as you're training it with them. Because even if the language barriers are there, then they're still able to understand physically. I can see what you're wanting me to do, and I'm doing it, and you're giving me a thumbs up. Okay, we're good. But now, of course, because of the large population of with the language, as we're developing the content, we're obviously going to develop content that's English and Spanish, and we're going to have it delivered in English and Spanish. Doing those kind of things to accommodate. There is a point where we say if they get to a superintendent level, however, that the individual, whether they speak English or whether they speak Spanish, they also need to learn the other in order to be able to move into that superintendent role. The reason being, not just the personnel they're overseeing, but because at that level, they're directly interacting with the general contractor and other trades and vendors and they need to be able to communicate effectively. And so between the time someone will go from being a foreman for however long they're in that role before they become a superintendent, we also will then be supporting them in learning their second language too, and having training for that as well.
Clearly, your next frontier is elite sales training? Because you just took the 3 barriers, things that I position as barriers, and you framed them up as the very reason this is the right approach. That's fantastic. So I think we know about the next book that you're going to write. Let's leave our listeners but before we go here. So someone with similar responsibilities in another firm out there, they're listening to this. What are some early steps he or she might take to implement structured OJT there in their arena? What are some precursors, some early steps that maybe they should take, aside possibly from reaching out and having a conversation with you?
No, and certainly that part I welcome. I'm on LinkedIn. Just look up Paul Smith ATD, and poof, there I am. I'm happy to interact with anyone. But the very first thing, because I don't want to blow smoke at anybody. SOJT can be a tremendous solution, and it can make a world of difference. In fact, I believe it can completely change the culture of an organization when it's done correctly. However, it is not easy and quick to build. It takes time. It takes involvement of a lot of people. There will be a lot of people with differing opinions, and there has to be resolve to see things through. So I mean, it can take some work to get there, which is again why a lot of organizations that want to do it don't necessarily go all the way through with it. But so I would say that before anyone starts trying to interview people and map things out, you first got to lay the foundation. You've got to get the leadership convinced that, okay, you need to get them to recognize the way we're doing it now. What we call on-the-job training isn't really even training at all. In most cases, it's a bad episode of Survivor. It's just, hey, we put them in the classroom and then we just threw them out in the deep end of the pool, and assuming they don't drown, they're a good employee, and that's you start talking about washout rates, start talking about turnover, start talking about the talent drain that's happening, where the good people, start pointing those things out to leadership, and then tell them how, if we do something smarter, if we did more structured on the job training approaches, we could reverse these trends. And we could, and I don't say this just as a hypothetical. I've actually seen it happen, and I've talked to other companies that it's in the book, the reference, the others are doing this, where companies are very successfully using such programs, both as recruiting tools to bring in great talent and as tools that retain. The Waldinger Corporation, I'll just mention just a quick aside. We train project engineers who want to become project managers, and they were having a lot of their good talent that was leaving after about 4 years or so because they didn't see themselves progressing. They weren't advancing, quick enough. Well, then we created the structure and job training program that gets them completely trained and up to speed in 3 years or less, depending on if they interned. That's a whole different topic. But the point being, they moved through that quicker. They were, by the end of 3 years, those individuals were stepping into jobs that traditionally it had taken 5 to 7 years to get to step into. And the result of that was, while prior to that program, they had people, good quality people leaving after, 4 years, whatever. At the point, at least that I left Waldinger a few months ago, there was not one single person who had participated in the structure and the job training program there for the project managers. Not one single participant had left the company. Every one of them was still there.
Wow.
And so, that's, those kind of things are the things that turn a leader's head. That's the information that you pass on, because then you get the leader excited about, okay, wait a minute. You mean I can save money on personnel costs by reducing the employee churn, and I can potentially increase the quality of the knowledge that my people know and the efficiency of the work they're doing, and I can do all of that in less time than maybe we're doing it now as we fumble around with whatever. It sounds almost too good to be true. Well, again, it's going to take work to get there, so it's not, it's not easy path, but all those things are possible. And so you get the leader convinced to see that vision, and not only will they support it, but they'll demand that you implement something like that.
Well, you're very generous to offer it up. Where can our listeners go and maybe reach out to you to have a conversation about this? Whatever's appropriate. I don't know if it's LinkedIn, an email, a phone number, but what's the best way for someone to reach out if they'd like to visit with you a little bit?
I think the LinkedIn is probably the best option.
Mm-hmm.
I used to at Welding, I used to say, well, here's my email, here's my phone number and stuff. But, then I try to be more cognizant of that. Well, actually, my company pays for those things, and I should not be, saying, here, just use that, whatever. But just drop me a note on LinkedIn, and I may take it. We may chat on the phone or email, whatever. But that's a good place to start. And then again, if they don't want to talk to me, they just want to get the book. It's Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or if they're an ATD member, just buy it from the ATD store. It's cheaper there. You get a discount because you're a member.
And the name of the book again?
Learning While Working.
Learning While Working. Get it at all those major outlets. It has been an absolute delight having you on the show, man. Thanks so much for visiting with us.
I always enjoy it. You guys are great to talk to.
All right. Until next time, we'll see you on Learning Insights Radio.